Did you know that? That's the original.
Yeah, interesting.
I actually learned that today. First step in that's good timing.
I got on the assessment.
Well, he's caught a lot of work.
Yeah, we're good. Kind of like I didn't realize that you were really in it. You have a slip.
Yes, you can.
You're going to be shooting, right?
Yes.
Okay. Then this will be the only time I do this. Will I be in your way right here?
Oh, no.
Okay, so I'll go around once it starts. I'm Troy, by the way.
Joe.
Thanks, brother. Are you streaming it too?
Yes, I
Oh,
am.
good for you. Who are you with?
I'm just an independent activist.
Oh, are you really?
Facebook feed.
Awesome. That's totally cool. I love that.
You know, I've sort of gotten into the habit of doing this because you guys aren't everywhere.
Well, it's good that you guys, because we kind of need surface stuff. You guys are doing it real well.
Yeah, I mean, I go out, I've been hitting.
There it goes. Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And thank you all the panelists for being here tonight. And I hope and I know there's going to be a lot of information given out and a lot of stimulating thoughts for you to take home. Most of the panelists are pretty much going to start with the basics because I know for many of you, urban renewal is a topic that you've heard of or something, heard the name, but as far as what it really means and how it's formed, how a district is formed, and that kind of thing is something some folks may not know about. For those who do know about it, please bear with us, and as we go through the basics. I do want to also recognize the office holders that are here. And Senator Marianne Jordan is here. And do we have other office holders here? Oh, Elaine Clegg, Councilmember Elaine Clegg, and Council President Lauren McLean, who is also a candidate for mayor. And do we have any candidates here? Anybody who has filed as a candidate who would like to be recognized? Where is that? I'm sorry. Oh, okay. And if you just want to stand and give your name and. thank you, Debbie. Oh, we got one more someplace. Where's that? Oh, there we are. Yep.
Brady Ford with Boise City Council.
Thanks, Brady. Okay, we'll start with the first presenter, who is Alan Dornfest. Alan is a senior property tax policy analyst with the State Tax Commission. And he is the person that the legislature goes to with property tax questions. He's also a speaker at a number of state or a panelist at other state events. He's been, how long have you been with the Tax Commission? It's been at least 5 years. At least 5 years. and he knows everything that's happened in property tax policy over the past 3 or 4 decades. So I'm going to turn it in. One other thing about Alan is to remember, it's important to remember that Alan is, the Tax Commission has 4 commissioners, 2 are Democrats, 2 are Republicans. So for the last 40 years, he has worked for, as a staffer, a bipartisan tax commission and done very well. So I'm really pleased that he's come here tonight and give us some really important background and with a great deal of authority. Alan, you want to take over?
Magic words are to get the slides up. This would be the time for magic words. Great, perfect. So I hope you guys can see it. Thank you, Representative, for inviting me. I enjoy speaking about this subject. If those of you who want absolutely more, we're teaching a 2-day workshop in Pocatello in 2 weeks. You may not want to do that, but certainly invited. So we're going to start out, if I could have the next slide, please. Okay, so we thought it would be a good idea to give you a little bit of a primer on this property tax. You may have a good understanding of it. I find that sometimes folks don't. And sometimes the myths about property tax abound. So in general, it's a tax on the value, the market value, that's typically what a willing buyer or willing seller would pay for property, of most property. It's not just on homes, by the way. It's on homes, it's on land, it's on farmland, it's on commercial and industrial buildings and equipment that's commercial and so on. So it's quite broad, actually. Broader than just being on homes. Although we'll say about 2/3 of it ends up being on homes. That's a big part of our tax base here in our state and in our city. The tax goes locally. I don't get money from the tax. The state of Idaho, as a state entity, does not get money from property tax. So it's all paid. You pay it to your local county, and then the county splits it up among the varying local governments and local communities in the county, and it's all locally retained. You can see some of the key shares of the property tax. Ada County as a whole, all the units of government ran about $605 million in property tax last year, which it's a big county, so that's about 1/3 of the grand total statewide. Boise City, about $155 million. Boise School District, 106. The county itself, out of that $605 million, gets to keep and work with for its services $126 million. And you can see the pie chart. I won't blind people with my pointer, but you can see the pie chart over on the side showing just the entire breakdown within Ada County. We have a community college district. They're getting $19 million. We have fire districts in Ada County, outside of the city of Boise, and so on. Ada County Highway District is about 6% of the total, with about $39 million in property tax. So that gives you a perspective, I hope, of the property tax in general. Let's go to the next slide, please. And if you'd like, I'm sorry we don't have copies of the slides, but we could easily make them available. I believe I sent an electronic version to Representative Gannon, so you have it, and I have it in my office. If you want to request it, I'd be glad to provide copies. So at any rate, what about urban renewal agencies right now? You didn't, by the way, you didn't see urban renewal agencies on the former slide. I'll come back to that in a minute. They are not what we call independent taxing districts. So a slight distinction. The city of Boise has authority under our state laws to ask you to pay property tax, and they do every year. The urban renewal agency does not. They get money from property tax that's allocated to them, but it's based on the levies of the other taxing districts. We'll talk more about that. Most urban renewal is within cities, and urban renewal can get revenue when property values within designated areas increase. And they are eligible for some, not all usually, of the taxes paid by properties, by the portion of a property with that increased value. They can then take that revenue and leverage it to get long-term financing, just like you would leverage your salary and get a loan on a house, which you otherwise couldn't afford in 1 year. Let's look at the next slide, please. So nationally, urban renewal is very widely used, or different words for it sometimes, but the same principle. Over 40 states, and those of us who study national trends see this increasing over time. 24 Idaho counties, not just our largest counties, but some of our smaller counties, like Boundary County in the north, also use urban renewal provisions. And there are, as of 2019, 87 unique areas established throughout Idaho. So you can see the blue-colored counties are all counties that have at least one urban renewal area. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the basic concept is, if you consider the red blob thing to be a municipality like a city, and the white area to be an urban renewal area, so within the city, an agency establishes, usually spun off by the city itself, but establishes an area within which they expect growth to occur, and they expect they'll be able to generate some revenue to do some special types of projects. So this is a starting point. We're assuming in this hypothetical world, this city has a value of $500 million. That would be way, way smaller than a city like Boise, okay, which has several $1 billion worth of value, maybe 10 or 12 billion, maybe more than that. So 500 million for my example, and there's 20 million in the property that's in this area to be subject to urban renewal. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we're assuming that something happens within that area, and in this case, we build some of these properties that you see from the clip art on the side, and the value of the city in this hypothetical doesn't change at all, except that the value within that one area grows from 20 million to 30 million. And in the next slides, we'll see what that does, because the Urban Renewal Agency will be able to capture or get allocated to it some of the taxes on that additional 10 million. But we'll see how that affects everybody in just a moment. So let's go on to the next slide, please. First, we have to understand a little bit about how property tax rates. You'll get a rate on your tax bill come fall, or the one you just got for your second half taxes a few weeks ago, like I did. And there's an overall rate, and it'll show the sum of all the tax rates of all the taxing districts that provide services for your property. But here's an example of one. The rates are not set in advance. And that's a very important lesson that will lead into the rest of this discussion on urban renewal. So this taxing district does what? It sits down, and within certain limits provided in state law, it says, okay, I want to get $2 million to run my service, whether it's libraries or fire protection or sewer and water services or cities or whatever it is. This particular district says, I need $2 million. And I've got $500 million in taxable value. We're going to ignore, for the moment, that additional value that got generated in the urban renewal area. Well, it's a simple division problem then. The $2 million in property tax that you want as a district divided by the $500 million gives you a 0.004 rate. And there are certain limits and all these things we won't go into right now, but that's just simple division. If that budget had been $4 million, it would have been 0.008. The rate is always derived from the calculation from the budget and the value. So, what happens to my home then? Well, my home, let's say it's worth $100,000. And we would then take that 0.04, this is what the county does, that 0.004, multiply it by the $100,000 and say, well, the tax to fill in that $2 million budget from all $500 million of taxable value, your $100,000 property has to pay a share, and that share is $400. How do they get that? They multiply that rate by the value of your home at the end. So that share goes to whatever district comprises the $500 million in this case, and the $2 million budget. Let's go to the next slide and we'll see what happens within urban renewal areas. So first of all, we notice the same calculation on the top. And the statement is correct. Generally, there is no loss of revenue to taxing districts. So what does the taxing district do? Well, the taxing district ignores the additional $10 million in value. It keeps the $500 million, you see that in the top here. It keeps the $500 million, despite the fact that there's actually been some growth. I showed you that a minute ago with the additional $10 million. So the levy rate stays exactly the same. Well, wait a minute, so how much money comes in? Well, with the $10 million additional, we're going to generate an extra $40,000. We still generate the same $2 million that the taxing district wanted for its budget, from the base of the $500 million. But there's $40,000 extra that's paid by the taxpayers in the urban renewal area, and that money, that $40,000, goes to the urban renewal agency. So we set the budget, we set the rate to raise $2 million. We actually raised $2,040,000. And if I were in your position, I'd be thinking, aha, so I paid too much. The rate could have been lower if we used that extra $10 million. Let's go to the next slide and talk about that. This becomes the conundrum to me, having studied this for so long. I can't answer that question. I should be able to, but the truth is that I can't. So there are two possibilities. Let's do the second one first, because that looks right to all of us. It just said they get $40,000 more. Some of that came out of my pocket. I must be paying a higher rate. Okay, maybe. The question that is hard to answer is whether property values in the urban renewal area would have increased without whatever benefit or incentive urban renewal was provided. In other words, the $10 million, those little commercial properties or whatever they were that I showed in that example, would they have been built anyway? And I don't know the answer to that. I'm certainly not qualified to guess as whether they would have or not. If the answer to that is, you know what, they were coming in anyway. They didn't have anything to do with urban renewal, and the $40,000 just was a gift, then there are increased tax rates, if it would have occurred anyway. But it could also be neutral to taxpayers, neutral to tax rates. Well, how can that be? We're carrying an extra $40,000. Well, what if the answer is that without whatever incentive was provided by urban renewal, those properties would simply never have existed? Then where's the $10 million in additional value and the $40,000 in additional tax? It's illusory. It doesn't exist. So that's the conundrum. I can't answer it. Maybe these gentlemen can. Certainly they could explore it with you. But would the project, whatever that project is that's increasing value and generate this additional revenue stream, would that have existed if urban renewal did not provide something, some service, some advantage etc. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is going to be hard to see, but I just had our mapping staff. We map all of these urban renewal areas within every place in the state, actually. And these are the active ones right now in the city of Boise. So I guess I'm assuming that yours isn't active yet. Other folks can comment on that. Let's go to the next slide real quick, please. So within Boise City, these are 3 active areas that we have right now. And then you'll notice, you can't see it, but the slide, it's cut off at the bottom of the slide. There are 2 new ones called Shoreline and Gateway that'll come in for 19, but they didn't get any money in 18 because they were new at that time. So these are the 3 that are actually in existence within the city of Boise, and they have generated additional value. Again, I'm not qualified to say whether the value would have been there without urban renewal, but within the Myrtle River Street area, which is the longest around of these since '95, there's a net increased value of $670 million and about just under $10 million that's paid to the Urban Renewal Agency. Within West Side, there's a smaller amount and about $3.5 million, and within the smaller 30th Street area in Boise, that's a 2012 one, $45 million, and so about $600,000 in tax. Let's go to the next slide, please. So, we pretty much have talked about this, but there are a couple of FAQs that I do want to underline at this point. So, the first question here is if property values would have increased anyway. So let's say that values were going up. Do taxing districts which provide you with services, the school, the city, the highway, and so forth, do they lose revenue? And the reality is, in terms of revenue, only the Boise School District does. They have a unique formula, unique in our entire state. And so they do have partly a locked-in rate and lose some revenue during the life of an urban renewal district. That's assuming values would have increased anyway. That's probably the main one. The second one of these I want to focus on for just a second because it's an important issue and it wasn't always this way. You know, we're all often asked, I certainly am, to go out to the polls and vote on whether to approve a new school bond or something like that. That would be the most common. And the question that we've gotten for years is when we approve a new school bond, we're thinking, oh, I want a new school for my kids, right? That's the type of thought process that goes into voting for something like that. Certainly with me it does. I don't think, oh, and I want to generate more money for urban renewal, no matter how worthy that may be. That's not why I'm voting for the school bond, typically. And until about 12 years ago, those new bonds like that did generate more revenue for urban renewal. And the legislature changed that law so that now, when you go to the polls and vote for one of those special levies, there's no additional revenue granted to urban renewal. All the money does go to the underlying taxing district for which you voted for its levy. I don't know if there's another slide. That probably brings me to the end of my presentation. No, there is one more. Yes, please. So let me just very quickly, the tax commission's role. We do not oversee urban renewal. We intersect with it in a few specific ways. We map it, so we have to look at the boundaries for various reasons. For taxing districts like the city of Boise and the highway district, we do approve their budget and their rate, and they have to conform with certain very strict laws. We also assign the value of things like railroads and public utilities to taxing districts. We also maintain an online registry, and you can go out to our website, tax.idaho.gov, and you can read through every plan, or link to the plan and then read it, of every urban renewal agency in the state. And with that, I think I've spoken long enough. Thank you for listening to me, and I'd be glad to answer questions and further participate. Thank you very much.
next speaker is Don Day. Don has a blog called Boise Dev. I don't know how many thousands of followers now. I think he's well over 5,000. And his blog, I think, is a comprehensive discussion of different actions that are being taken in Boise as far as buildings and what's going on at meetings. He attends most of the meetings. He attends some of the Capital City Development Corporation meetings, the City Council, Planning and Zoning. He's a journalist by trade and has won a number of different awards and has taken on this task of keeping track of all of the growth issues that are going on in Boise. And very factual, a lot of information, and something I sure recommend that you take a look at from time to time. So he's going to talk just generally about urban renewal, its history, and in Boise, and where it's at now. Don?
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the opportunity. I want to give a shout out to Alex and the Raptors running the slides today. We'll try and make this easy for you. And I'm just amazed at the crowd here. This is a big crowd for a pretty wonky topic. How many of you have been in Boise less than 5 years? A few. How about less than 10? Less than 20? And then we'll flip it. 20 plus. Wow. Okay. So I think that shows us the demographics of the crowd of people who've been here a long time. So I grew up on the bench, went to South Junior High. Last time I was here, I remember being a lot older. So I'm not quite sure what happened to the room here. Boise is constantly in change. At Boise Dev, I launched in 2016 to cover that growth and that change in this area. And being a new news organization, trying to get my arms around some of the things that you find important. And what I'm really happy to see here, there's a lot of reporters in the room tonight. So along with all of you, there's folks from the Statesman, the Hillcrest, and KTB. So people who weren't here can also get this. I'll also plug, we'll have a recap on Boise Dev tonight early morning. So we can go to the first slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we've been with urban renewal. Now, I think it's really important to point out that we're talking about Boise, but there are urban renewal districts all over this state. Alan alluded to it. Just off the quick top of my head, you've got Garden City, Meridian, Twin Falls, Driggs, Pocatello, Eagle, all over the place. CCDC gets a lot of attention and heat, and there's a lot of representatives here in the room tonight. To their credit, I think that's really great that they're all here. And part of that is because they're in the capital city and they've done big things in downtown Boise. So I'm going to go through kind of the history of some of that. Urban renewal started in Boise in earnest in the mid-60s. So for those of you who've been here that 20 plus time frame, if you're talking about the 40 and 50 plus time frame, you might remember that. And it started with grant funding. It was a federal grant. This is on the CCDC's website. They talk about this. That kind of got that going. And the vision at the time was to clear the canvas, build a mega project, and focus on infrastructure. And they followed that for really the first 7 or 8 years. This is a Harper's Magazine article from 1974 that I think changed the conversation around urban renewal. Those of you who have been here a long time remember downtown Boise in the 70s and 80s as being kind of a desolate place. It wasn't a really great place to visit. There wasn't much going on after dark. And this article in Harper's Magazine, which isn't really something you hear much about, but in the 70s was a pretty major force, said that Boise is essentially trying to tear itself down. In the early 1980s, the conversation started to shift a little bit. If we can go to the next slide. If you look at Boise Dev, you know I love a good rendering. It's my very favorite thing. This is a rendering from 1981 of a plan for a mall in downtown Boise. And if you look really closely, you can see there on the right, that's the 805 Idaho building. That's where Fork is, that's where Davies Moore is. The idea was, let's pull down a bunch of buildings and let's build a downtown mall. They called it, in the proposal, a shopping utopia. In the Boise Town Square Mall, I don't know if I would call it a shopping utopia. I'm not sure I would call anything a shopping utopia. But. So So that was kind of the vision. Lots of properties were torn down and people were starting to get pretty frustrated. In the mid-1980s, the political winds shifted and a new mayor came into town. Does anybody know who that is? Dirk Kempthorne. So Dirk Kempthorne, a Republican, came in and as mayor has essential control over the CCDC board and started to make some changes. And one of the biggest changes was to change the model from what they had initially started with grant funding to focus on tax increment financing, which is a lot of what was just explained by Alan. We can go to the next slide here. This is downtown Boise in 1985. And I had to look at this a few times thinking, wait, and this isn't, I don't mean to denigrate Nampa, but I thought, is this Nampa? Like, you can actually see the now US Bank building out here to the left of the screen. Those of you who've lived here a while remember Michael's Furniture Show Place. That's their warehouse. This is the Barber Spur, the Union Pacific Railroad. Downtown wasn't a pretty place. And I think city leaders smartly figured out that they had to make some pretty big changes for this to keep working, for this to be an economic engine for the region. And they did. So if we can go to the next slide. We're going to kind of gloss over the next 20 years as CCDC formed. They did a lot. I think you can see the results. I don't think we have to talk about what happened because you know what happened. The agency right now has 5 urban renewal districts. You can see 4 of them right there. The River Myrtle District is the next one that will sunset. That's coming up here in 2024. Is that right? Maybe? Okay. I'm not getting a nod. I think that's about right. And then 3 additional districts. On the next slide, you're going to see one of the 2 newest, and this is Gateway East. This is around the Outland Mall, out in the desert. So that's kind of a brief overview of what's happened here. John asked me to cover a bit about the funding of CCDC, and I think it can get a bit complicated. The biggest revenue source, I believe, is tax increment financing, as just explained. There's also some other sources of revenue. Parking garage revenue, when you use a parking garage and you pay to park, those revenues flow to CCDC. On their website, they say activities are currently funded through a combination of tax increment financing, parking system revenue, and some outside grants. So that's kind of the basics. I think you wanted me to sort of set the table a little bit, and I think we'll have some interesting speakers tonight and can delve into more of the minutia. But I appreciate the opportunity, and we can go to the next slide. All of the stories. Oh, one more. Actually, you know what? Let's talk about this real quick. I forgot about this. I apologize. So this is actually the bench study area. I'm sure Doug with CCDC will go into more detail. The last numbers that were presented that I saw, and I apologize if these have changed, showed 4 sub-districts for the study area. About 1,200 acres, 1,700 individual parcels. I think most of you have probably seen this. And it's broken down into 4 sub-districts. One is a large area for the tank farm that's to the left. One is Overland. There's another one along Laytop, and then the final one is along Vista Avenue. So the CCDC hasn't decided where exactly this district will come together. It will at all, of course. And some of these things may change over time, but this is the area that they study. They hired a consultant. And the consultant did a block-by-block, parcel-by-parcel study of all of the parcels, all 1,762. And I believe they took like 4,000 photos, if I remember that data from the meeting. But they determined that 82% of all the parcels in those 4 areas met at least one of the factors outlined in Idaho state law to be eligible for an urban renewal district. So that can be things like faulty street layouts, it can be deterioration of buildings, and a number of different factors that legislators have decided are characteristics. Their consultants found that each of the areas met the definitions of law and were eligible. So now the process of deciding what's going to happen. So now if we'll go to the last slide, all of the stories that I've done on this going back to 2015 or 16 are at this address, so you can find that, and we'll keep covering that, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, Doug. Now the next presenter is from CCDC, is Doug Woodruff. And Doug is going to talk about the districts and give us some background. He is the project manager for this area that has been studied. And he'll also give us information on the process that happens and the future, what kind of procedures we go through. So really appreciate Doug being here tonight, and I'll turn this microphone over to you.
Thanks a lot, John.
I'll say one thing. We're going to have a little break, and it's going to be an exciting break. We will have a break in about 2 or 3 speakers. It's going to be really exciting because we're going to talk very briefly about what you got in the mail. Many of you got in the mail today, which is your assessment notice. And so, but we will devote 5 or 10 minutes, but that's something to look forward to. Doug?
Thank you, John. Hopefully I don't get too many questions about that notice because it wasn't me. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again, John, and thank you all for taking time out of your evening to come here and learn more about urban renewal, and your interest is really important. So is your neighborhood. I really appreciate Alan's comments. I think he did a nice job of explaining a very complex way that the funding process works for urban renewal. Kudos to Don as well for sharing some of the background and history about CCDC. The shift from federal funding area to local funding was an important one, and something that really has changed the story of what urban renewal is here in Boise. It's now a story about how neighborhoods want to shape their future, and not a story about how the city wants to shape your neighborhood. So if there's one thing that we take away from tonight, is that's what we're interested in doing with you, is learning more about your neighborhood, pulling out those neighborhood plans again, going through them together, and deciding whether or not we move forward with the study area and an urban renewal district. Bear with me while I adjust my talking points to not double cover some ground. I do want to mention while we're up here, or while I'm up here, that there are maps laid out here across the front. So during the upcoming breaks, please do come down and take a look. There's a map at the far end that shows the study area, overlay with the neighborhood association boundaries, so you can get a sense of where those neighborhood associations overlap the study area. There are 8 neighborhood associations that touch or are partly within the study area boundary, and I think we have representation from most, if not all of them, here tonight. And then we have 4 more maps, and these are zoomed in on each of the 4 sub-areas. There's an aerial image below it, so you should be able to take a closer look and understand what properties and parcels are within the study area and which ones are not. So these are here to share, and we can share these digitally afterwards as well. So just to reiterate the point that, what is urban renewal and what isn't urban renewal, or what is it not? Urban renewal is simply a funding mechanism that we as a community can choose to use to fund local investments and local improvements within our neighborhood. Urban renewal isn't a regulatory body. We don't oversee zoning. We are not a planning organization. We don't set forth new plans or policies that are used in that regulatory process. Our partner, the city of Boise, serves that role. So it's a unique niche in which urban renewal fills within our city government. really we're the implementation body of these plans that are in place. And I think it's an important point also to mention that urban renewal relies on the tax revenues from the private development that happens within the district. And it's those revenues that come from the district that we use to do the projects that you would like to see within that district. So it's that those local revenues staying within your neighborhood and accomplishing things that we'd like to see happen. So why don't I share a little bit more about the process to date and the process to come. When we are asked to look at an area of town, the first step that needs to happen is to determine whether or not an area is eligible for urban renewal assistance. And that's done in the form of an eligibility report, which Dawn shared some background on. That's a factual effort, right? We have a third-party consultant come in and analyze the existing conditions to help us understand, are we in compliance with state statute or not? And the report determined that yes, the study area is in compliance with state statute. So that's step one of many. What's ahead of us now is the formation process. And this formation process will include a series of steps that include differing types of analysis. The result of this planning process, if we make it to the end, would be an urban renewal plan. That plan is it's a requirement of state law and is something that the agency uses to hold ourselves accountable because that plan will include your ideas and your goals for what you'd like to see us do. So if we do break that plan down, there's two main parts to it, and both are essential. The first is a development plan, or in simpler terms, a list of projects we want to see happen. That project list, after reading through the neighborhood association plans and ACHD's 2012 bike head plan, Blueprint Boise comprehensive plan, some of the things that jump out when I look through that are bicycle facilities on Overland and Vista, a complete street on Orchard Street. The tank farm area, if you look at Blueprint Boise, has been identified for years as an area that is kind of destined to change. And there's been some discussion of that tank farm being relocated to a different part of town. Well, if that were to happen, what becomes of that area? We could use urban renewal to help fund public improvements in that redevelopment. And that would be a partnership between private developers and a public agency. The role that we would play is helping fund the amenities that you would like to see. In those plans, it talks about more parks, better park amenities, better pedestrian connections, retail, neighborhood scale retail destinations, right? Places to walk to shop or hang out on a Sunday. Those are the sort of things that we can assist in helping realize within your neighborhood. So that's one part of this urban renewal plan, is this long list of projects that say, okay, we worked together and decided that this is what we'd like to see happen. Well, that's great, right? It's kind of like, well, I'd love a ski boat, but can I afford it? I don't know, probably not. That's the second part of the plan, is we are required to and like to, because it helps us make sure that we can, in fact, deliver, do a financial plan or a financial feasibility study. And what that basically is we look at the vacant properties. One of the terms that we use is sites susceptible to change. So like the tank farm or the old school site at Franklin and Orchard, thank you, or other properties within the study area that would be good private development on. And we forecast what those tax revenues will be from that. So goes back to what Alan was explaining about that increment. So in this financial feasibility study, we look at that and say, okay, over the life of the district, this is the amount of money that we can reasonably expect to be reallocated to the agency to reinvest in the projects that the neighborhood wants to see happen. That project list and that feasibility plan have to balance. If they don't balance, then there is no district. So there's work that needs to be done together to look at that and understand, one, is the level of private development that we're anticipating in this plan acceptable to everybody? Two, does it generate enough money to fund the public parks and sidewalk improvements and other infrastructure upgrades that we all want to see? And if it does, then we're in a position where we can decide on, okay, we can carry this forward, and this is something to move ahead with. And when forming the district, now we've got a funding mechanism in place that could help us realize a lot of the things that are already being identified as needed up on the central bench. So a couple other remarks before I turn it back over to the group. Alan mentioned Boise school districts and some nuances there. I'd like to share that the study area does include 4 public schools. It includes Jefferson Elementary, Monroe, Whitney, and Hawthorne. CCDC, the city of Boise, and Boise school districts have a cooperative agreement in place that we worked out late last year and finally went into place in January this year. And that cooperative agreement basically says, hey, let's work together on any new urban renewal districts to include schools so that projects that would benefit the schools as well as the neighborhood can be identified and funded with some of these urban renewal funds. So we look at Boise School District as a partner in these projects and are excited about the opportunities to help fund those sorts of projects. And that's something that I've been hearing from community members is that safe routes to schools are paramount up on the central bench. And so I thought that was an important point to share. And then that might be good actually. We'll have a chance for questions. So if I've glazed over anything, which I'm sure I've glazed over hours of things, please raise your hand, jump and shout. I'm happy to fill you in. So thanks for coming again tonight, and I'll turn it back over to John.
Our next speaker is from the city of Boise. Remember, the city of Boise is quasi-separate entity from the Capital City Development Corporation. They're related, but they're not. I don't know how to describe it. I'll let Darren discuss it. Darren Fluke is in the planning department and works on a lot of the developments, proposals, and ideas that the Urban Renewal District comes up with. And he's going to tell us a little bit about his role and what he what that process is.
Thank you, John. Good evening, everybody. As you probably noticed, I'm not the mayor. He couldn't be here tonight. He sends his regards and his regrets. He said I speak with his full authority unless I say anything inflammatory or controversial, in which case I'm entirely on my own. So, in an effort to not do that, I did prepare some remarks tonight, which is not something I typically do, but I am going to essentially read my remarks because I think it will work really well with what you've already heard. And so, as John mentioned, I'm in the planning department. I manage the city's long-range planning section. We have 6 planners that are primarily concerned with how the city is going to look, feel, and operate 20, 30, 50 years from now. And so our role is to prepare plans, working with stakeholders such as yourself, to create a vision for the city, and a vision that's implementable through the future. And why I'm excited about urban renewal districts is because the original sin in planning, the worst thing you can say to a planner is that you created a plan that just sits on the shelf and gathers dust. That it's not implementable, nobody opens it up again once you get done writing it, and there it sits until you go and do another plan. This tool is a way for us to implement the plans that we work so hard on with all of you. So we often hear at the city of Boise that we only care about downtown. That downtown gets an inordinate amount of attention and investment from City Hall, while other neighborhoods of the city simply languish. There's many examples that would prove the opposite point, most notably the neighborhood planning and Energize Our Neighborhood programs, our park planning program, and others. But without arguing the point, I will concede that the city has been able to bring more resources to bear in downtown, largely because of urban renewal funding. It provides the funding to do that, to make necessary public improvements that catalyze private redevelopment, thereby beginning this virtuous cycle of increasing economic activity, increasing property tax revenue, and therefore increasing the money that we have to spend within the district, we the people. I would note for the record that on the whole, from the general fund, the distribution out of the general fund is pretty equitable across the city. 2/3 of the general fund go to just 3 departments: police, fire, and parks. And those are all services that necessarily are spread evenly across the city. The other 1/3 of the general fund budget funds almost everything else in the city, all other 10 departments that I didn't just mention. And then there's also a capital improvement fund that's separate. But know that the resources that the city generates through the general tax fund are pretty well spread evenly across the city. It's important to note, though, that downtown is unique amongst Boise neighborhoods. It's not like the Central Bench. Its demographics, its urban form, the infrastructure needs are all distinct from those of your neighborhood. The Central Bench is one of our first inner ring suburbs and was largely built in the period following World War II through the late 1970s. Development standards and patterns were morphing from patterns based on human needs, primarily because you had to be within walking or streetcar distance of your basic needs, to a more auto-centric form. And that's what we see in the Central Bench, is that the auto-centric form of development beginning to develop. Many areas lack sidewalks and basic connectivity for pedestrians and bicyclists. Lotting patterns and ownership are highly fragmented, and I'm sorry, I can read that. And the Central Bench began life largely as an agricultural area. Think Orchard Street, and that is so named because of the large number of orchards that were up in this area of the world. That led to a legacy of uncovered irrigation main lines and laterals as well, which is not something we typically deal with in downtown, having just the one irrigation course through downtown. And of course, there's simply a lot more residential development than there ever was in downtown. So these and other facts demonstrate that the urban renewal in the Central Bench will look different than it did in downtown, but it doesn't mean that there aren't needs for public investment within your neighborhood. And it's really up to you to help us define what those needs and priorities are and how those funds get allocated. The Central Bench has been found to be eligible for urban renewal, which you've heard, and now the hard part begins. So specifically what we're going to do is stitch together the many valid plans as a starting point and a framework for engaging with you, the public. Today I had one of my team members put together a list of pertinent plans within the greater Central Bench area, and there's no fewer than 8 neighborhood plans, which doesn't include the city's comprehensive plan, but it does include the Central Bench bike and pedestrian plan done by the Ada County Highway District. Just note for you as a salient example of the kind of things that urban renewal can do for a geography, there are 224 pedestrian-related projects identified in that Central Bench bike and ped plan. There's 57 bike-related projects. 9 of those are funded or programmed for funding. So the only other way to fund those is through ACHD's community programs budget, which I would point out for you that the Commission is intending to prioritize last as they go through the 2020 budget exercise, which is upcoming. I would encourage you to get involved in that process if active forms of transportation are important to you. But we can help. You know, urban renewal can be used for bicycle and pedestrian projects, that can be used for affordable housing projects. And it's important to note that the district as it operates is very opportunistic. They look for opportunities to partner with private interests to create a public good. The district does not operate in a manner where they're out doing projects on their own that have no public support or private partnership. So the list that we come up with going through the planning project, the list of capital priorities for your neighborhood is bound to be long, and it's sure to exceed our ability to pay for everything. But the planning process is intended to create an actionable and fundable list of priorities for investment over the next 20 years. We at the city look forward to working with the neighborhoods to do just that, and ultimately to make your plans a reality, not just for you, but for your kids and their kids. Thank you.
And our next presenter, before we talk about your assessment notices, is Lori Mccarran. Lori is, a very passionate affordable housing advocate who participates in many city council meetings, planning and zoning meetings, and is very tied into the community of renters and those who rent. And it's very important to remember that we have a lot of rentals in Boise. We probably have a third, as much as a third of the housing in Boise are rentals. And so I'm going to turn it over to Lori to talk a little bit about that.
Hi. I'm glad that you were just reading off your presentation, because I'm probably going to do that too before me here. Boise followed the pattern of many cities in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, which was expansion of the suburbs and disinvestments in our close-in urban areas. I forgot my thumb drive, but I also had the Harper's Bazaar or Harper's Magazine slide that I was going to show. Probably everyone remembers when Boise made national news as a city that almost eradicated itself. With upwardly mobile people fleeing to the suburbs, along with intentional discriminatory banking policies that made banks complicit in denying loans to poor and minority people, low-income households and communities of color began to deteriorate. Boise had large and vibrant communities that today no longer exist, like the River Street and Central Districts, the home of large African-American neighborhoods in Chinatown. Urban renewal policies of this era often use highway system expansion, public health concerns, and in the case of Boise, a game-changing downtown mall, as justifications for mass clearance of homes, businesses, and neighborhood institutions, and set the stage for widespread public and private disinvestment in the decades that followed. As we should have done then, we should do now and ask, who does urban renewal really benefit? And does it really do what we want it to do? The supporters of revitalization say rising tides lifts all boats, as wealth comes to the cities or to specific neighborhoods. But critics of revitalization simply call it gentrification. While increased investment in an area can be positive, the goal of urban renewal is to increase the property values in an area, which is another way of saying gentrification. It is often associated with displacement, which means that in some of these communities, skyrocketing rents and property taxes means that long-term residents are not able to stay to benefit from new investments in housing, public infrastructure, healthy food access, or improved transit. These gentrification and displacement pressures threaten economic and racial diversity of a region in the long term. Today in Boise, we are already experiencing an unprecedented housing affordability crisis. Even a job does not guarantee that you will have a place to live. Many people are experiencing housing insecurity, rent gouging, and we have an eviction epidemic. Even more alarming, homelessness is on the rise. Landlord-tenant law offers very little tenant protection, so people who rent are being evicted just so landlords can increase the rent. And in this market, with a vacancy rate hovering around 2% for all rentals and 0.3% for affordable housing, they have nowhere else to go. Boise was recently rated 5th in the nation for the highest spike in rental rates over 1 year. According to the report by ApartmentGuide.com, the average one-bedroom apartment in Boise now rents for $1,062. Two-bedroom apartments cost an average of $1,344 per month, which is a meteoric 20.2% rise in just 1 year. When Boise Renters United did a survey of Boise renters in December, 70% of the people who took their survey said they were currently rent burdened. And 78% said they live in fear of getting a 30-day eviction. Gentrification not only impacts the low income, our essential workers in urban areas, but is deeply connected to suburban and rural poverty and homelessness. These are the areas where people go when they are pushed out of cities. Urban renewal and gentrification are never about meeting the needs of the poor or eradicating poverty. They are plans for stabilizing the economy of the city, maintaining a tax base of middle and upper income residents, and making the city conducive to business interests. Urban renewal invites speculation. It brings in investors, oftentimes institutional or out-of-state investors, who swing in and buy up property in a proposed or new URD, which drives up the cost of land. Sometimes they can hold onto the property for decades to wait until the big deal or developer comes along, shutting out local residents and businesses and even leading to blight. Sometimes they flip it right away, which can lead to the demolitioning of existing affordable housing to be replaced with high-end luxury new construction that further fuels the housing crisis. It can prevent local businesses from having reasonable leases. Much of the Boise Bench's businesses are filled with small, locally owned business, and it is an incubator for refugee-owned businesses. Often with urban renewal, the lease rates are such that only national chains can afford them, driving out our local homegrown businesses and siphoning all of the economic gains out of our community. One of the tenets of strong towns is that the best growth is slow and incremental, and that this will lead to the most sustainable communities. Urban renewal is the opposite of incremental development. Is urban renewal without gentrification possible? Is there a way to accommodate the forces of change while also respecting local communities and cultures? Public, private, and nonprofit sector leaders have the opportunity to implement strategies that give longtime residents a chance to benefit from increased investment in their communities, and even be a part of driving how some of those changes in their neighborhoods take place. The key to revitalization without gentrification is this great quote that I found: bringing residents in the community to the table often at the beginning. This kind of public planning process requires a great investment of time and resources by city governments. But without this investment, the only result may be inequitable, developer-led urban revitalization. Cities have to form diverse, inclusive partnerships, foster openness, and collaborate on goals and outcomes. The 3 Ps of preventing displacement are the protection of residents, the production of affordable housing, and preservation of its existing affordable housing stock. Thank you.
Talk about the assessment notices, and I'm going to ask Senator Jordan to speak a little bit about her bill, and afterwards I'll tell you what happened in 2015.
Good evening, everybody. How many people got their assessment notices today in the mail? Good times. So, for those who are perhaps first-time homeowners or are new to the area, 4 years ago, there existed an index on the homeowner's tax exemption, so that as the value of your home increased, the amount that was exempted from taxation increased proportionally. During the downturn in 2008-2009, several legislators were getting complaints from people that as property values came down, their homeowners exemptions were going down as well. And their response to those complaints was to cap the homeowner's exemption at $100,000 and to get rid of the index that would increase your exemption as your values went up. So consequently, that cap happened right at the time that property values started to really increase here, especially on the bench and in our neighborhoods up here. So any home now valued at over $200,000, which as we all know is pretty much everything at this point, is now subject to that cap and has a much larger proportion of their value that is taxable. So this year in the session that just ended a little while ago, that we thought for a while might never end, I introduced a bill that would reinstate the index on the property tax exemptions. And that bill did not even receive a hearing by this legislature. So I'm working over the interim to try to at least find some middle ground that we can offer some relief to taxpayers if we can't convince them to reinstate the index all right away. But in the interim, I have a call to action for all of you. We're all frustrated by it. We're all troubled by it. Contacting your Boise legislators isn't going to do any good because they're all on board. They were all co-sponsors of my bill. They're all completely supportive of reinstating the index. But my ask of you is this. If you have friends and you have family, people that you know outside of the Boise area, people in Meridian, Canyon County, anywhere else across the state, speak to them about this because this problem is happening all over the state of Idaho. And have them contact their legislators as constituents so that those legislators understand that this is a problem in their area as well. And hopefully when we come back next January, we'll have a few more folks on board that we can try to advance this issue and get a hearing and get that index reinstated. So thanks for giving me a few minutes to talk about that. Appreciate you all being here tonight. Thank you.
And Alan Dornfest wanted to say something about it.
Thank you, Representative. And the only thing I wanted to add about that is we understand the concerns, and the state has some very strict laws about the way budgets and levies work and the way property taxes actually change. It can be pretty confusing. And here's what I'm going to encourage you to do, but don't do it yet. We need another week to get our system up and running. But in a week, go out to our website. We will have something right on the front page, hopefully somewhere easy to spot, called the Tax Estimator. And it will lead you through a very, very simple process to punch in your new value and get a really close estimate. We can't be exactly spot on, but a very, very close estimate of what that increase in your assessed value, it was not a bill, that was a value, that's the tax base that's changing, what that increase in your assessed value will probably mean for your taxes. And I will make a prediction here, okay? It will not be one-to-one. In other words, if your value went up 15 or 20%, your taxes will not do the same. I'm not going to say they're not going to go up, but they will not do the same. They will not go up that magnitude. If you're interested in finding out approximately how much they will change, go out to our website, and that tax estimator will be up in about 1 week. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. And I was in the legislature when the cap, the inflation adjustment was repealed, and found this article from 2015 from Channel 7, and this is what I said, and it's exactly come true. The only predictability it brings is that if your house is worth more than $200,000, you're not going to see an increase in the homeowner's exemption. And that's exactly what's happening, because if your house is worth more than $200,000, the homeowner's exemption is not going up because you don't have the inflation escalator as we had before 2000, I think this was 2015. And I'll pass this around just so you can see. And myself, at the time, Senator Work, somebody named John Elliott Work, he was our senator, and also Representative Chu. We fought vigorously against this because we knew what was going to happen. Prices for houses were low at that time, going up, and I really appreciate Senator Jordan working on this and seeing where we can go. It's just one of those things you just keep coming back and pushing. Okay, the next part of the forum is for questions from Neighborhood Association, and we'll start with the Vista Neighborhood Association, and if you Henry Weeby is the president of the Vista Neighborhood Association, and he is here tonight. He is a real estate broker, is that correct? And knows a lot about that. So, Henry, I'll turn it over to you. Each neighborhood association will have 5 minutes, and they can ask questions or make statements or whatever they want. Free country.
I thought I'd start by saying I bet we can find some common ground. The common ground that I'm thinking we could probably find is that we all like Boise, and we all want to continue to see it be a great place to live. And I just thought that's important to say because we all want that, and that's a really beautiful thing against what the efforts are. So all of us are working to try and make that happen, whether that's keeping up on our place or showing up at our jobs or working on master planning. So as the Vista Neighborhood Association president, I have no money or power. So that's pretty powerful, isn't it? And I don't mean to mock it, because it's important. It's a pathway where the citizens can direct their energy at people who don't get paid to hear about it. And so that's a tricky spot, right? Because we're to be accountable for what's happening, and that takes energy and time and commitment, to which, as you know, is hard to give because the world's a busy place. So I just want to give credit to all the people that volunteer, as neighborhood leaders or show up to meetings like this. So thank you all. Background. Yeah, I'm a real estate guy, so I spend some energy thinking about, property and values and what does that look like. And I also worked at CCDC for a brief period in the early 2000s. And so that gave me a really wonderful place to understand urban renewal, maybe more so than the rest of you. That experience was while CCDC was growing the portfolio, and the maturity of the main core was completing. And at that point, CCDC's core mission was parking. That's the linchpin, right, to get developers to go curb to curb and go vertical. So when they change districts, right, they've got to come up with a new focus for how they put their energy in to try and see the growth. So I wonder what will become of our neighborhood and how that planning process will unfold. So today, I've had one meeting with him over a cup of coffee, and thank you so much for taking the time this last Friday. So that was the first time that I had an opportunity to have a sit-down discussion with them. I could certainly attend their meetings, and I can read all the stuff on their website. But no one's come to the neighborhood leaders to ask, what is it that we need or want, or how could this work? And to me, that's troubling because, my wife got back from a vacation here recently, and she brought me a shirt. It was white, and it says, question everything. And so at my house, that's what I do, and it's in my nature, it's in my role, I question everything. And so to some folks, I apologize for that, because it can get a little intense. So. But I'm questioning that. Who in the neighborhood that I represent has gone to CCDC or the city for that matter and said, we're looking for urban renewal because we don't think we are getting what we need or want? And I asked that question, and so far, I don't have a list. So who asked? So where's this energy coming from? City planners, because that's who drew the map. Did they come to us to see what might be a good thing to include or exclude if we're going to pursue this? No. Not that I'm aware of. Do they care about our plan? Maybe. It expires in 2020. I look at what people do versus what they say. And so far, the doing in reference to the neighborhood plan for the Vista area is kind of mute. And I'll give you an example that's pretty important. It's a Simonage property and it's a farm. And maybe many of you know where it's at. It says you are traveling towards the airport. It's on the left-hand side. And so everybody's pointed with their elbow for decades that ought to be a great park. But I did a records request for the city as that owner died and people were thinking about buying different houses on it to see where that was going. And the records request included the mayor saying, and his staff, we don't have any money for something like that. So maybe CCDC comes up with a plan. That would be great. That'd be an improvement. But again, nobody's come back to us to ask us, what does that look like? So that's one of my questions. When are you going to include us? Yeah. Okay, well, that's enough of my volunteer time.
I think that as long as Henry's involved, there will be a lot of give and take, because Henry's one who is very skilled at working on real estate and very skilled at working with local governments. So I think you'll have a good road. I did want to mention that it's my understanding, and I'll try to sort of explain, but it's my understanding that this was a feasibility report. In other words, it's whether it's feasible or whether. Okay, why don't you explain exactly what this initial study is?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to clarify. So, we are dripping with jargon, so bear with us. This initial report is called an eligibility report. The next step would be to determine the feasibility. So in eligibility, we're looking at the existing conditions of the public right-of-way as well as the private parcels and assessing whether or not there are qualifying criteria, which are listed in the state statute, that deem the study area eligible for further study about whether or not urban renewal is a good fit. So what has happened to date with the Central Bench study area is a third-party consultant analysis of eligibility. In April, the CCDC board accepted that report, which determined that yes, it does meet the state statute, and we can move forward with the next step of study. In May, the City Council also reviewed and approved that, and with that action, it authorizes comprehensive planning and CCDC staff to begin engaging with you all in a process that would move into the feasibility. And that's where we're balancing the checkbook, right? We've got plans of parks and sidewalks and other improvements that the neighborhood wants. Would the forecasted tax revenues in a 20-year district pay for that or not? So we're at the very beginning of the process, and the next steps will include a series of open houses. We're considering a working group of property owners. We're launching a website, which will be www.ccdccentralbench.com. That will be the go-to spot where information will be posted, upcoming events will be listed, and a really great way to interact with us and share your thoughts about it. And on there as well, if you can make it to the open houses, you'll be able to interact with digital open house, which is the same way to provide your input. So I hope that clarifies a little bit.
Big help. One clarification. The eligibility study has the 4 sub-areas. If your home isn't in one of those sub-areas, does that mean that you would not be included in the future? Is the eligibility just limited to the properties in the sub-areas? There you go. Would that be the case?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question because it's an important point. The Central Bench neighborhood is unique to urban renewal. We have not operated in a similar context or neighborhood. So the way that we're approaching this process is unique and new as well. And what I'm referring to is the 4 sub-areas. 1,800 acres is a lot of ground. Vista Avenue is not Overland Road, right? They are different places. They have different types of commerce happening. They serve different establishment neighborhoods. So the reason that there's 4 sub-areas is because in subsequent steps, we could potentially do a urban renewal district that's only a portion of the study area, maybe 1 sub-area, or the urban renewal district could be 2 of the 4 sub-areas. So generally speaking, an eligible study area, okay, let me try this again. An urban renewal district can be smaller than the initial study area. It cannot be larger than the initial study area. So if your home is currently outside the study area boundary, it would not be included within an urban renewal district. However, Henry pointed out some things on Friday in our coffee conversation about potential parcels that we may have overlooked in our initial study. If more of that sort of input came our way and we go, gosh, that's really relevant, we should take a look at that, we could do either a second eligibility study or an amended eligibility study. Of course, that would need to go through the same rigor that it does to make sure that it qualifies. It's not a done deal, right? We need to look at it. But in that case, if we decided, hey, we need to look at a larger area, we could go back a step and do that.
Thank you, Doug. Okay, we'll go to the next neighborhood association, which is Hillcrest, and this is Dan Lowry, who's the Hillcrest president, and Dan is retired from the United States Navy, and he's got, how many years have you been doing this? 5, 6, 7, 8 years? Too long. Okay, there you go.
The Hillcrest Neighborhood Association, from the maps, seems to be indirectly affected by this. The boundaries run around the Overland Road section of the Hillcrest Golf Club, or Country Club, and then along Overland up to the physical rehabilitation business. And that's about the extent where we are. But monies that would be spent on projects in the area, it affects our travel to and from downtown and going to and from our businesses. My main question having to do with urban renewal is just exactly, you go down Leda and you go down Overland and down Orchard, and you see a lot of businesses and a lot of older buildings. And these businesses support families. They provide income to the owners and the employees that work for them. There are families that depend on those businesses. So we got urban renewal that comes in, and somebody wants to build a brand new building that maybe it's going to displace that business. So what happens to him? What is the human cost of all this on these arterials that we want to have, that some people want to have urban renewal on? And I got one last thing. I sent out a yellow card to all the addresses for Hillcrest, I was wondering if I could get a raising of hands to how many people from Hillcrest are here today. We sent out about 300 of them, and we don't know the cost, but thank you for coming.
Lynn Lockhart is the president of the Morris Hill Neighborhood Association, and she has quite an active group there. She has also quite a few restaurants in that area, especially on Orchard Street and on Emerald, and they have a monthly meeting in a different restaurant. So that's how she attracts people to her group, and does a good job. Usually has a good turnout. Do you buy lunch for everybody too, or no? Okay, but okay. So I'll give turn over to Lynn.
Thank you, John. So first off, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Representative Gannon for caring enough about his constituency to throw this out. Thank you, John. So John was kind enough to put together some packets. They were area specific. Morris Hill is the largest area found within this urban renewal. And he put together some packets so that we could pass those out to the individuals who would be impacted, the residents as well as the business properties. So I had the opportunity this weekend to talk to several of those folks. And I think, from what I could tell, the primary concern was, how will this impact me? I kept hearing that over and over again. Just to dovetail on what Henry had said, this was prior to the notice coming out in the Idaho Statesman. I had not been aware of this. I had not been informed. Our association had not been informed of this urban renewal district proposal. So it came as a shock to all of us. So I appreciate you pointing that out, Henry. I hope that we can prevent that from happening as we move forward and work together. One concern that I have is, I know that the city, Darren mentioned that there are several different plans that are going to be taken into account with regard to this. I know that Central Bench Neighborhood Association recently completed their neighborhood plan, but I also know that there are a few other neighborhood associations within the Central Bench boundaries, such as Morris Hill and Liberty Park, who don't actually have neighborhood plans. I know we applied several years ago, and we were told by the city staff that we were kind of toward the bottom of the rank as far as being eligible to actually create a neighborhood plan for our area. So I would like to be assured that our voices will be heard when it comes to this, that the people of Morris Hill, people of Liberty Park, will actually have the opportunity to speak up and say what they want. I mean, you mentioned that you have some sort of list. I'd like to know what the list is for Morris Hill. I've not seen that. So, and I do hope that the individuals who live and work in Morris Hill would have an opportunity to weigh in. So I guess that's really all I have to say. Again, thank you to John and to all of you for being here and your willingness to speak with us tonight. I know I'm grateful, and I'm sure all of you are as well. Thank you.
Before I turn it over to Betty, I did pass out, Joe Goody, who helps me with these kinds of things, passed out a summary of some of the traffic counts for the Vista interchange and the Orchard interchange. I wanted to get the traffic counts for Orchard Street, Latah, Vista, Overland. Was unable to get them from Compass, but was able to get those counts and the estimates of what those counts would be in 2040. And when you look at it, I don't have it in front of me, but it generally looked like about 2% more vehicles per year coming off the freeway and then down Orchard, or down Vista, and about 2% exiting Orchard and Vista, 2% increase per year. So there are some, so those, because obviously transportation and traffic are huge concerns on the 4 designated streets, and I would encourage you to watch for more information on how traffic impacts, because that will, of course, impact how the streets are planned and how urban renewal functions there. I'll turn it now over to Betty Hovey. She's from the Liberty Park Neighborhood Association, and
thank you. I'm going to start, first of all, with one of my questions that I had, because looking at just the limited details, I see moving some tanks out of the location that they are near Liberty and throughout the area there. My first thought was, oh, this is a great opportunity for real estate development. And what I want to know is, with urban renewal funds, is that limited to real estate development? Because I think we've got concerns about water and sewer structures, transportation infrastructure down near Liberty Park, and a need for home and building revitalization. We've got HUD housing down there that has been there since probably the 60s and has not been maintained to the level it should have been. And so Liberty Park is a very beautiful little park there down in our neighborhood, but we are surrounded by low-income, poorly constructed housing. And I got to counting, and right now we have 11 rental apartment buildings in our Liberty Park neighborhood, and one more developing. And that is, with the number of homes and apartments together, is only 1,148. So you can see that just about everybody down in our neighborhood is living in a multi-housing area. The other thing that's kind of unique to Liberty Park is, if you drive down there, we have become a service district practically, with St. Al's moving across the street and building and building and building. And with that, and Dairy Gold processing plant, the juvenile justice system, those kinds of things, a lot of rehab over there, alcohol group homes, and home development for autistic people. As you could see, we're service and rental right now. And so rental people, I have good support for people that are renting, because that's the way you usually have to start out in life, is renting. But a lot of those people are also looking at, we'll be here for 5 years and we'll be gone. So we don't care if there's a sidewalk from down Liberty Park to Denton to the city park. And so there again, we've got highway traffic issues, and we also have no sidewalks and that kind of infrastructure. So my question comes back to those what, 17,000 acres, or how many acres did you say there was in that area? My question is, does that include water and sewer improvements, transportation improvements, and home and building revitalization? Because that's our first interest before real estate development.
respond?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. It's an excellent question, and I think you've hit it spot on. An urban renewal district in the Tank Farm area could fund sewer improvements, water improvements. It could fund new streets that improve connectivity and things like that. It could fund environmental remediation in the Tank Farm area. It could fund purchasing of property within that for use as a public park or other pathway, right-of-ways, things of that nature. So when we look at how that might play out in the future, it would be a balance between real estate development and public investment. And the reason I say that it's a balance is because the real estate investment and the incremental tax revenue that's generated from that is the money that we would use to pay for those sewer upgrades and pay for the water lines and pay for the roads and the parks. So that's what we'd like to work with you on in the next bid is understanding what is a good balance between the intensity of redevelopment that might happen and the type of public infrastructure that you could get with that, with the revenues that would come from that. Yeah, sure.
I have to ask one more question. I guess I'm getting a little brain here. My other question is, if you look at the map of the renewal plan, it is eliminating most of Liberty Park neighborhood associations. So that doesn't follow the lines, the designated lines of what the neighborhood associations are designated as. And so we're cutting off about half of our neighborhood, the people that live in our neighborhood, about half of those, which will be confusing, I think, to people trying to decide, should we do this or should we not do this? Because if you're only going to do it for half of us, none of us will support it, I think. And I wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Yeah, that is also a good question, and can we get together and talk about a good way to handle that? Because I don't think I have a good answer right now, but it's an important point because all 8 of the neighborhood associations that are touched by this study area are only partly included, right? We don't include an entire neighborhood association. So I'd like to work with the neighborhood leaders in figuring out how do we approach this and tackle it. You know, an urban renewal study area that is encompassing 8 entire neighborhood associations is a completely different approach than where we are today. So, yeah, let's follow up on that. I think that's...
Thank you, Betty, and thank you, Doug. Oh, Aaron? Sure.
So I just want to follow on a little bit because I'm somewhat troubled by the idea that the city hasn't asked and that we're trying to impose a plan on your neighborhood. As I stated, there's there's 8 separate plans within this area for the various neighborhood associations, not including Blueprint Boise. And every single one of those plans has a very large public engagement component that goes along with it. I spent 12 years as a consultant doing this sort of work on the outside, and I used to say that if a city would hire me and just let me sit in a room and write a plan, I could have it done in a month. But where the time goes is in public engagement. And I can tell you when we do a neighborhood plan, as we're doing 3 at the moment, and we just finished 2 others, including the Central Bench plan, those plans on average take a year to complete. And that's not because the city is imposing its will upon the neighborhoods, it's because we're out talking to the neighborhoods and engaging with the public. So I wanted to be very clear to everybody that we didn't engage the public in the process of determining eligibility because that process is very strictly limited by the state code. And it has very strict laws about what you may and may not do. And it says explicitly that no planning for an urban renewal district can take place until eligibility has been determined. Eligibility is a binary question, yes, no. Is it eligible, is it not? It is not, what do the neighbors feel about their neighborhood? What are their hopes and aspirations for the future? None of that is included. That's what we do through the planning process. And so I want to assure everybody here that all of the planning that exists today is based upon a lot of community engagement. And as we move forward with the development of an urban renewal plan, there will be many more opportunities for more community engagement.
I did promise that we would take questions from the audience, of course. So what I'm thinking is take one from that section, one from this section, one from that section, and that section, and that section. Because we have about time for about 6. So if you all raise your hands and do we have anybody over here that would like to ask a question in this section? Somebody back there. Let me start with people who actually live in the bench, actually live in the neighborhood. Everybody who has a question actually lives here. And let me start with them. Yeah, if you take that over there, Joe.
I live on Latah Street, Latah and Rose Hill, and I haven't heard anybody from any of the neighborhood associations talk about Latah Street at all, so I kind of want to know what's going on with Latah Street.
I think we do have 2 directors from the DBNA. John, do you want to talk about that? Or do you feel like, or John, either John or John, you want to? No?
You guys are talking a lot about bicycle lanes and sidewalks and that kind of thing, and Latah already has all of those things. So, what's up with Latah?
Is there somebody up here who wants, Aaron or Doug, do you want to talk about that? Okay.
Great question. The Latah sub area also includes 2 elementary schools, Monroe and Jefferson. It's an important connection to downtown Boise in the Central Bench and beyond. So part of including it in the eligibility study allows us to have further conversation. If it wasn't included, then it wouldn't be something that we could further study. It is fundamentally different than Overland Vista and Orchard, right? I don't know if you can consider it a commercial corridor or that folks would envision it becoming a commercial corridor. It's a neighborhood corridor with a commercial node, right? So I think that's some of the important contextual considerations that we want to have. And so I look forward to talking more about that and are there improvements that we want, what that might be beyond safe routes to school with the elementary schools and some other ideas. So, Darren, do you want to add on?
Thank you. So think of it this way. If we didn't look at it in terms of eligibility, we wouldn't be able to add it later. So it makes sense to start big with eligibility and look at a very large boundary and say, is this area eligible? If so, then we can start to talk about what the public improvements might be within an area. Latah is a good neighborhood commercial corridor. If you think of the east side of the street, much of that has neighborhood serving businesses there, including a restaurant now that's doing very well. And I also know that there is interest in redeveloping a car wash at the southwest corner of Latah and Alpine. For example, if that developer were to come in and request a redevelopment, typically the developers will want to do the bare minimum possible to get their project approved. In that case, it would probably be something like 5-foot attached sidewalks and a bare minimum standard of design. If we have tax increment financing to help out with the public improvements, you could see detached sidewalks that are much wider, where you have perhaps street trees buffering the pedestrian realm from the traffic moving on the street. You could see a plaza area incorporated into a project, a future project there that would be for public use. And so we just, as planners, we try to step out of how it looks today and think about how it's going to look in 20 years and how we can make projects look, feel, and act better on the street.
Darren, could the city invest like that anyway? Right. Could the city step in and help in that regard anyway, or is there only a way that they could do it through CCDC?
Well, certainly the plans would support that sort of assistance.
The blueprint part, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's an existing model.
I mean, this is sort of a question of good urban design, and if we had unlimited funds, then certainly we could do that. But as I stated before, 2/3 of our general fund is already going to fire, police, and park service.
The city already has excess cash now, yeah?
I would say no, the city does not have.
And how do they
excess
pay
cash.
for overfunded or over-budgeted projects like fire stations?
So the city has a long list of priorities that come out of these planning documents, and every decision that's made is always a trade-off between, virtuous projects. And so facilitating better urban design does not always rank highly with any unallocated funds that might be in the general fund. So it really is a question of resources. And the genius of urban renewal is that taxes generated within the district must be spent in the district, and they must be spent on public improvements, period. It's very simple, and it works very well. I mean, I think downtown speaks for itself in that regard.
Thanks, Darren.
Thank you, Henry, and thank you, Darren. Let me see. There were a couple of other bench residents. Joe, you want to go?
I would like to know if you're going to use any of the Department of Housing, the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development grants. Because the reason is when I read tonight, first, not less than 70% of the community development block grants funds must be used for activities that benefit low and moderate income persons. Our central bench has about 60% in that area. And the second, the funds must be spent on eligible activities which are broadly defined as including community development, activities directed toward neighborhood revitalization, and so forth. But my question is, I hear you say state. Can we go with federal grants? They're available. Who's working on it, and are we going to get them? Thank you.
Darren.
Okay, first caveat, I'm not a housing expert, but I would tell you that the HUD funds are typically directed toward housing, and you're right, they are directed toward low-income individuals. Beyond that, they can be spent on certain, the block grant money can be spent on certain public improvements that are not housing. And a good example would be the new transit shelters that you see on Vista today, which were a result of the Energized Vista project that the city spent 2 years engaging that neighborhood and determining what would benefit the neighborhood. And so there are places to be where those funds can be spent, but by and large, they are earmarked for housing, and by and large, there's not many funds there. I mean, we're getting considerably less than we got 20 years ago with a population that's essentially doubled. So federal funding is not a reliable source for us.
Another question out there from a bench person? There's a couple back.
My question is, a lot of the people off the bench here, we live in Pasadena, Roosevelt area. They've been paying for years for irrigation. So if you're talking about digging the road up to put in sidewalks, to build bike lanes or whatever, or build parks, Why can't we get what we're paying for, especially since our taxes are going up? I know there's irrigation available because the town is paying us. And where does the country club get their water from?
Next question.
You talk about the paying for not paying for water you can't get.
Yes.
I'll talk to you about that afterwards. I was once on the irrigation board, and most of the country club actually got out of the district when I was on the board. We got about 40 or 50 homes in the country club subdivision out. But I'll talk to you after that. Oh. All right. There's another bench resident.
Hi, my name is James Rothig, and I live on Liberty Street. And the west boundary of the Tank Farm sub-area includes Liberty Park, but it does not include the 6 residences to the south of Liberty Park on the east side of Liberty. I'm just wondering why those weren't included. I live in one of those. Thanks.
Liberty Park was included in the study area because it's an opportunity to make improvements. There's a gravel parking lot there and other amenities that I think have been identified through the parks plans that I'd like to see happen at Liberty Park. So that's the reason that the park was included. As far as why the 6 houses to the south were not, I need to take a really close look at the boundary line, but I would suspect that the complete right-of-way is included, so that the street servicing your house as well as Liberty Park would be included in the study area.
Another bench question? A couple please back.
Yeah, I live on the east side of Vista, and I don't hear any, the one thing we see on the east side of Vista is we see lots of problems with sewage, lots of problems, huge problems with water, especially with sewage.
Speaking of the mic.
A little closer here.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah, great.
I live on the east side of Vista, and one of the things that everybody over on that side would notice is that the streets are substandard, number one. Number two, the water system is abysmal at certain times of the year. And I know they keep telling us that you can drink it, but I don't know anybody that would dare drink it. It's brown, it's deep brown. And then the third thing is and this has all been left off of the urban renewal area. There's a school called Hawthorne School on the east side of there. And that's in the middle of a blighted area, and the city refuses to accept that as a blighted area. The old trailer houses that are there are run down. For years, they were off their foundations and things like that. And a lot of, I hear people saying that, well, we need affordable housing, but affordable housing doesn't mean unkempt housing. And I don't hear anybody talking about the streets in that area and the blight that happens on certain parts of the area. Thank you.
This is exactly the type of input that we're glad to be getting, so thank you for sharing that. You're not the first to mention that area, and it's something that we're interested in going back and looking at. I mentioned earlier in the forum the ability for us to amend the eligibility study and increase the boundary, if that makes sense. So as we hear more of this from folks like yourselves, then that's guidance for us to go back and fine tune things. So thank you.
Way in the back there.
She's got the mic.
I'm Deborah Müller from the Central Rim Neighborhood Association, and I would like to share a little bit about what we experience in our neighborhood. Central Rim is very pretty, but we are surrounded by commercial buildings that are separating the
the stagecoach theater, restaurants, stores from our neighborhood. The way it was built, it really makes it impossible to connect. And so our neighborhood was proactive last year with the help of the Treasure Valley Artist Alliance and local artists. We added 5 murals there in an area that is really ugly. I did the fundraising and I got a lot of feedback from our neighborhood about this system that we have. It is a structural system. And people would say, oh, we need murals all over because we are so separated. We have just this wall, you know, separating us from the businesses. And what we also have is unsafe sidewalks. I mean, you cannot walk there as a mom. If you have grandparents at Morris Hill neighborhood, it's dangerous. It's simply dangerous. If you want to go to an ice cream place that is just a few feet from your house, it's dangerous. So that's from the Central Neighborhood Association, what we have to say.
Hi, so I'm a homeowner and my property is within the Overland sub-area. So I went ahead and examined the photos from the eligibility study on pages 39 through 46. And I noticed that there were several included that are no longer in disrepair. So Burger Time and what used to be Auto Body Paint and Supply is now open as Boise Tattoo Company. So I was curious about the inclusion of businesses that are now up and running, or how the timeline went with the study versus the approval. And I was curious about some other eyesores that weren't included, such as the old fire station next to Idaho Sewing and Vacuum.
Tackle that.
I'm so glad somebody read the report. And good catch, you're absolutely right. The third-party consultants did field work at 2 different times, and because of the amount of time between those, there were some improvements that have happened between then and now. The fire station, which is just next door to that, is within the study area and is something that is an opportunity, frankly, for the neighborhood. And I think we cataloged, the consultants cataloged something about 4,000 photos, so trying to choose ones that exemplified the neighborhood without turning into a Goliath document is a bit of a challenge. So although we don't have photos of everything in there, we do have them cataloged and something to look back on if we need to.
Well, and I think this is a really great example of Boise is growing, explosive growth. It's one of the fastest growing cities and one of the fastest growing states in the country. It's, the growth is already happening, development is already happening. Properties that maybe have been sitting for years are, obviously getting improvements. It's just a normal organic process. And so, this is another reason why it seems like an urban renewal district is just like gentrification on steroids. Like, do we need this? Is it going to develop incrementally, healthily, sustainably on its own?
Those are great examples too of where we saw the private investment happen, but the sidewalks in front of those two investments are still dilapidated and in disrepair. So it's a prime example of how, yes, Boise is growing, but the public investment necessary to keep up with it isn't happening.
One would say, like Henry said, should this not have been part of the city's duties over these very many years to maintain these sidewalks, to reinvest in these neighborhoods, to be concerned about our safe routes to school for children? A lot of neighborhoods have been completely neglected by the city, and now we need to have some sort of big movement or development, inviting all this development and speculation in that's going to radically change our neighborhoods. And all this time the city could have been doing all this investment that was necessary.
I'll give this to Darren, and I do want to, I hope everybody appreciates the fact that there are people who disagree on this panel, and isn't that wonderful? I mean, it is. It really is. People are talking to each other instead of just shouting at each other or getting on Facebook and saying, whatever they say, And I do want to also thank Lily. Lily lives in our neighborhood, and she spent a lot of time going through the pictures, and I'm really glad you were able to bring that up. There was another person who was a realtor, real estate, who was going to be here tonight, and I know she wanted to say something too. And is she there? Oh, it was a woman, but we'll take you guys too. Oh, okay. Yeah, let's
I do have the mic right now.
Way in the back.
Quick question. Rapid growth here in the state, particularly in the Treasure Valley. Median house prices right now are somewhere in the neighborhood of about $300,000, $350,000. Right now, in order for a family to purchase a house, own a house, they need to be making somewhere in the neighborhood of about $80,000 a year. That's $20 an hour for both individuals interested in owning a house as a family. Part of this is speculation. Part of it is the home ownership, zoning issues. Is there a possibility that part of the urban renewal process will involve significant investment in low-income housing in order to keep our service personnel, our service people, fast food workers, shop workers, in Boise, rather than forcing them out to affordable housing out in Caldwell and beyond?
That speaker is Joe Evans. He's well known to most of us. He's an activist and creates a lot of lively discussion. And I appreciate you being here tonight, Joe. Joe is incidentally a veteran of Afghanistan and served that country. And I'll give this to Doug too.
So yeah, speak to that for a moment. Urban Renewal District can do things to support affordable housing. We're hearing that it's a priority for the central bench, so we can make that a priority in the plan. It can't do everything for everybody as far as affordable housing goes, but we can also make sure that we orchestrate the plan in a way that we seek out partnerships with the Grower Housing Initiative the city's working on, as well as pursuing federal funds and other things to do that. So, we can take this input and shape the plan in a way that reaches these results. Darren, do you want to add anything to that?
When Doug says that urban renewal can't do everything for everybody, that's really true. And I want to point out for you that CCDC acts as a partner and a catalyst for these projects. Often the work that they can do within the public realm helps make projects pencil that wouldn't otherwise pencil. And so we're able to develop projects like what you're describing because we can help on the margins by funding public improvements that then the project doesn't have to fund itself. Examples of this are now in process with the Dare Manor down on Fairview coming into town with new path housing, which is right across the street from that, and also the Ash Street condos, which are workforce housing. all of those projects were not built by CCDC, but they did participate in them, and they made them possible in ways that probably wouldn't, the projects would have never got off the ground were it not for that extra assistance.
So my question is sort of a reflection on my experience with the city regarding development. We had to go through a PUD process in my neighborhood, and it felt very one-sided, that the developers had the run of the situation, and that no matter, even though the law says the neighborhood is supposed to have input, like we are having here, when it came down to when the rubber hits the road, you get nothing. And so I guess my question is, what kind of assurances do we have that you guys are going to actually work with our associations to get what we really want out of this process? Because we all know development's coming, but you're kind of asking us what our price is, and I think our association is here to tell you what it is.
So if the question is what assurance do you have that we will work with you in the development of this plan, is that a fair summary? Well, I think the proof is here tonight, that we're here engaging with you on this, and we're now scoping a public engagement process that will go forward from here. And so I don't have a way to assure you any better than that, other than to say stay tuned, because this is going to be a fairly quick ride. I know it seems like a year and a half is a long way off, but as I mentioned previously, the development of these plans are complex, and it takes a lot of time to engage with the public. And so we're going to be asking you to engage with us in a meaningful way and in a relatively short period of time over the next year.
Darren, how did you decide a year and a half?
Yeah, that's a good question and a fair question on the year and a half. And so our target date for having the districts established was by the end of calendar 2020, so that we could start to gain increment starting in January of 21, so that the districts could build. Well, it's not arbitrary in that there were things happening on the tank farm properties that it looked like that was a project that was moving forward a little more rapidly, and we needed to be ready to capture that increment, because quite frankly that was the genesis of looking at the entire bench.
But that steps on your tongue from your last statement about how you can't do planning about urban renewal without forming a district, which would require including other people, right? So you've been having conversations about urban renewal, the district formation of properties and concepts and scopes of vision.
We've had conversations about eligibility, which is the first step before you can do a plan. We are legally prohibited from doing a plan until a finding of eligibility has been made. So now we have
discussions with developers, property owners, formations of parcels and how that could look. You haven't done any of that.
There's lots of jumping on the tank farm area in Blueprint Boise, and that's the jumping off point. Yeah. And yes, naturally,
so well, you said it was the statutes prevented you from having these kinds of discussions, and yet you've been having them.
We've had no.
I got that wrong. I'm ready to hear how it's done.
So the city has a comprehensive plan that it took 3 years to develop, and it had a whole bunch of public engagement. Planning, land use planning, transportation planning happens every day at the city, and those plans, in the case of our comprehensive plan, have been on the books since 2011. The various neighborhood plans range anywhere from 1999 in your own Vista neighborhood up through 2018 in the Central Bench plan, so there are various vintages. That's what we do, that's what we get paid to do. With the question of urban renewal, however, there is a very particular process that you have to go through as stipulated in the state statutes before you can create an urban renewal plan, before you can essentially stitch together the planning work that's already been done into what's called the urban renewal plan. And so that is the process we are now initiating because a finding of eligibility has been made. And so now we're starting the process of going out to the various neighborhoods and the people who live there to say, are these plans that have been done over these many years still valid? If not, why not? Are there things that we've missed? that should be included in an urban renewal. And so it's just I know it sounds like a bunch of boring planner process, and it very much is, but that's what we have to live with if we want to employ this tool to, you know, enhance the public infrastructure in the neighborhood.
Let's get a question from another bench person. Bench resident, John?
We really only have time for 2 more questions. But I do recommend, there's a lot of questions out here, but we don't have the space. We only have the space until 8:30. And I want to keep the people who helped put this on waiting.
I think they're enjoying these questions.
No, I mean the technician, the custodian that's been helping to put this all together.
Let's get 2 more quick questions.
Two more quick questions, and I recommend everyone to stay after and ask whatever questions you had outside. But I don't want to keep the people who are working to put this whole event together waiting.
I'm a 50-year resident of the bench. I've been up and down Vista, and I have not been able to find a single businessman who will tell me that they've asked to have a CCDC district established on Vista. And I'm kind of curious, who put this together? You guys talk like it's a foregone conclusion and all the various steps. Who asked for it? I haven't seen any groups that have come forward and said, we want to be in the CCDC area. And they haven't been to the council, they haven't been to the CCDC meetings. Where did this come from? Where did it originate?
It originated in the existing planning documents, such as Blueprint Boise, the city's comprehensive plan, and the 8 other neighborhood plans that I mentioned, that all have extensive public engagement along with them. All of those plans have a long list of wished-for public improvements in them that we don't have money to build.
All in commercial areas only? I mean, that's what the maps show, is essentially commercial areas on each side of these various throughways or streets, arterials.
That's correct, and that's because the commercial areas are the areas that generally experience redevelopment and therefore generate TIF, and therefore are able to fund public improvements within these revenue allocation areas.
And the last question I think all of us are curious about is Chevron. Who's going to pay for the relocation and rehabilitation of the tank farm? Will that be a public expense, or will Chevron have to pay for that if it's moved?
Those are privately owned facilities, and they're negotiating with various private equity firms to fund that and pick them up and move them elsewhere.
They fix the soil.
That will be a requirement of any redevelopment prior to, you know, as the tank farms are disassembled and ready for redevelopment, they will have to be remediated in accordance with the regulations of the Department of Environmental Quality and also EPA.
One more bench question.
And if you know you don't get your question answered, reach out to one of these people. You could call them after this. John, I'll give you Doug's email address if you have it.
Hey, testing. Hello. Anyway, on my card, we were talking about having the ACHD person here. Well, since he isn't here, I'll just get this out of the way. It's the most annoying thing to me of all, and I hope all of you feel the same way and see if you can get the ACHD to do something about it. They asked, when they redid all of our main avenues in Boise, they indented the manhole covers so deep in the asphalt that it's like you're breaking your axle or knocking your car out of alignment. I've never seen that like that before in this town. It's all over the bench that way. And I'd like to know what ACHD is going to do about it and when. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think we're going to have to close it now because I think Doug and Darren's voice in particular are getting hoarse, and Lori's out of things to say. Henry's not out of things to say, but you're going to get a chance. More chances, I know. And, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. There are a couple of maps up here that you can take a look at, and stay involved. This is your neighborhood and your